I'd have to see it. Don't know. Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks, of course, have a history here in Laguna Beach. And Pancho Barnes and her family were friends with them because they often used the estate in Pasadena as a film location. And so the Lowe family knew that family pretty well. But I'd have to know what that photograph is. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Joyce. Okay. Great.
We would like to record this, so if you wouldn't
Please,
mind.
come on. Come on.
Well, I'm Joyce Barnes, and my daddy was Stanley Barnes, and his youngest brother was Rankin, and he married Pancho. And Pancho was a lot funnier than you've said. One of the things I thought would be fun to share is that whenever we were in trouble, the kids, 5, 6, 7 years old, if Pancho was coming over, we knew when she was coming because there was this different kind of a sound on the door. It was the bang bang, crash crash, and Mom would open the door, and my daddy would say hi, and she'd come in, and my mother never got up again to answer anybody at the door because Pancho stood there and just invited everybody in and told everybody, and pretty soon there'd be a 2-day party. We were free. And I have a lot more to say, but that's just a little thought.
Wow, more. I came here hoping to learn new things. This is terrific. I'm so glad you came.
This is terrible.
Definitely tell that one.
My Uncle Rankin was ended up the canon of the Episcopal Church in New York, but he was the pastor at a little church, St. James, in Pasadena. South Pasadena. Thank you. And one time, she was very angry with him, and she did start her horse down the aisle. And got almost there. One time she was mad at him, he was gone too long, and so she painted a little room down there at the house and black, and painted his little prayer stool black, put a cot in there with a black blanket and said, "That's where you can stay for a month." And he did. She used to buzz. Hi, there's part of my family.
Glad you're here.
What did he?
Congregation, think of her,
They knew that, that the family, the Lowe family, was well known in Pasadena, and she was, she had a sister who was the absolute base and loved the tea and everything, and Pancho was just gonna ride the horses and go out there and do something in the air, and Lowe, of course you probably know this, that the grandfather was the man that invented the balloon reconnaissance military actions. So it was a brilliant family.
Yep.
I've taken enough time.
No. Relatives told me that LaDroit, they named LaDroit Street, after a street in Pasadena.
Well, there are a million stories, and they're all too terrible to tell, so I...
Thank you very much for sharing. I need to talk with you later and get those stories. Don't let her leave. No, it's true. right after, one thing I didn't, there's so many stories, like I said, it's a whole nother talk about Pancho Barnes, who was a major character. But soon after she got her pilot's license, she did buzz her husband's church. That was one of the first things she did. The church is still there. It's called St. James Episcopal Church. And the tower, the church, the bell tower, actually was donated by Pancho Barnes in memory of her mother after she passed away. So she did support the church. Both Reverend Barnes and she stayed friends for a very long time. They didn't divorce, I think, until the 40s, actually formally divorced, but they stayed friends, and he visited her out at the Happy Bottom Riding Club, and they still stayed friends, and that was pretty nice.
Mount Low, did that have anything to do with the family?
Yes, it did. Her grandfather was Thaddeus Lowe, who was a prolific inventor, but he's best known for flying air reconnaissance in hot air balloons for Lincoln during the Civil War. He's the one who recommended it because too many people were getting killed, and he thought if he could sort of spot everybody, it would maybe end the war a little earlier. And so as a result, he is considered the founder of the modern-day American Air Force, United States Air Force. So you can see how she was greatly influenced by her grandfather. He invented. What else did he invent? He invented a lighting system, a gas lighting system that was in use. He invented dry ice, which facilitated shipping of materials across country. One of these cooling systems. What was your question?
The Mount Low.
Yes.
Railway, Mount Low Railway.
Yes, and when he retired to Pasadena. But of course, with an active mind, still kept things going, and he did. He built the incline railway there, and he knew the McNally family. They were also living in Pasadena, and so they named the highest mountain point Mount Low in his honor.
You didn't mention any of the bar that she ran up there at Europe, doing all the flyers you can hang out.
Yes. Yes, she. What happened is Pancho Barnes had an immense amount of money, of course, and when the Depression hit, she was known for taking care of people. If she had a buck in her purse and you needed it, she'd give it to you. And she, of course, continued living the lifestyle that she had. But as her pilot friends couldn't find work, she started buying apartment buildings and putting them up, and their families, and paying medical bills. And it took her till about 1934 to run out of money. But she was taking care of a lot of people. There's letters in the archive from people, because she'd do things anonymously oftentimes, pay people's medical bills or make sure they got food. And there's thank you letters in the archive that people found out who she was and said thank you. But anyway, she was broke. She sold her last asset in 1934 and bought, it was 68 acres out in the middle of nowhere. Actually, one stop past nowhere, a place called Muroc. And she knew about this place because she had done some stunt flying and films out there. And it's one of the largest natural flat places on Earth, and ideal for landing and taking off and testing airplanes. And she bought an alfalfa farm out there, and as a single mom, reinvented herself and started laboring out there in the desert, building this farm up, and eventually got some cows and started a dairy. And as her property started to grow and her business became larger, so did the air base out there start to enlarge. And so she actually was the first PX for them out there and supplied milk to them. She had a dairy called Rancho Oro Verde, which was the name of her ranch, and started supplying food to the base out there. And she, like I said, had the dairy, and things grew. And eventually, by the 40s, she started supplying a place for the people on the base to come and relax. And she was an innovator and just knew how to party and created a good place for them to blow off steam. And it was a fairly famous place. Like I said, at one time, it was 9,000 members in her club, paid members. Quite a businessman, built her fortune up all over again on her own.
We're interested in the airstrip at Smith Cliffs. Do you have any anecdotes anecdotes, more anecdotes about the airstrip, or how long it's there, whether any crashes taking off or landing, or?
Yes, there was a crash. Shortly after the Women's Air Derby, she participated in the first Women's Air Derby that left from Santa Monica Airport, first cross country, and later on she got Union Oil to sponsor her in some of her other flights. By the way, she was the first female test pilot for Lockheed. In any event, on one of their flights down here from Los Angeles with some officials from Union Oil and another famous flyer of the day, somebody crashed their plane and went into the, it was unrelated to her, was going to land on her airstrip in an emergency and overshot the field and went into the ocean and died. And of course that devastated her, and she closed down her airstrip after that. But I don't know very many other stories about her, unfortunately.
How long it was?
I don't. Oh, you know, great. What more do you know about it?
Well, I'm a retired pilot, radiator and airline pilot, and Dick Jarris, some years back, took me, I said, where was the airstrip exactly? He said, so we drove down to McKnight Drive, and I measured it on the odometer. I said, this is 900 feet, and it's downhill. You know, you haven't landed into the wind normally. 900 feet's not a very long,
No.
aircraft carriers that are longer than that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Dick's here tonight, but he had a lot of stories about Pancho.
Oh, thank you.
It was a fellow named Dick Dobbs, who was a wealthy guy and a sportsman in 1930. What happened, he went up and started to leave, and he got into an airplane and he crashed on the first rock.
Oh.
And my grandfather happened to be at Pancho's at the time, and he and his friends got together and they went into the ocean to try and save anyone they could, but it was too late, and the kerosene or part of the gasoline they were talking when they came out, they were all burned.
Yeah.
And that's what Jim Harrison.
Yeah, that's right.
But even though that airfield was, you know, barely adequate for its time, well, the fact is that it was, by any stretch of the imagination, real short.
Yeah, she was an extremely skilled pilot. And so for Pancho Barnes, I'm not surprised that it was a challenge that she could make.
I was up actually when she died out there in Mojave.
Yes, in Boron.
Sad story. She just, horrible.
Yes.
Sad.
Yeah, the end of her life is rather sad. You know, she was a person that really encouraged people and did a lot for people and supplied a place for them to relax and always encourage people to be themselves and be who they are, because you're here to be who you are, not somebody else. She would tell people, you know, don't even try to be like somebody else, because we've seen it already. You know, she encouraged you to be yourself and enable people to be who they are. And in the end of her life, she had a thyroid condition. She was hyperthyroid, and in that condition, you can actually become psychotic. You know, have hallucinations, delusions, and indeed, she was acting a lot more strangely. And she was never odd or strange. She was always different, but she wasn't. You know, she wasn't odd. And so when she started acting odd, people should have said, "Oh, maybe there's something going on here." But instead, they just gave her more space and said, "You know, leave her alone. That's Pancho Barnes. You know, she's a great lady." And unfortunately, that's probably what killed her, because nobody really took care of her. So a person that took care of people all their lives, in the end, no one took care of her. And she died alone in a rock house in Boron and wasn't discovered for several days. Yeah, very sad end to a great lady.
Hurell, did he ever do any landscape photography of note? And did he ever meet Georgia O'Keeffe and her husband? Was there knowing him, did he ever speak of her, or was there correspondence?
You know, I have seen the family archives. I have had access to them, and I haven't noted anything in there about Georgia O'Keeffe or her husband. in the archives. But you know, there are some beautiful landscapes that he did while he was on trips with Pancho Barnes in Mexico. Those are now at the Getty, by the way. And there are a few scattered around, I'm sure, out there, probably even in this community.
Yeah, I do. Could you just ask the flyer over here which way the airport, the landing strip went? Was it north-south or east-west?
Actually, it went more or less east-west down to Ninth Drive. Actually, that would be more north-south, I guess. But it wasn't, you had to, when you're landing down, the wind comes from off the ocean normally, and you had to land going downhill. Remember, these are airplanes that really didn't have brakes. They had tail skids, and so it wasn't done right. You landed too fast and you're going downhill, how exactly do you stop? And so that was the challenge. And when I measured this thing out, it was I said, this thing's only 900 feet long, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You know, one thing I was hoping somebody would know the answer to this, because the family's told me about it, and I don't know if it's true, or if it is, I'd like to know more about it. Evidently, Dos Rocas, she lost it because she couldn't pay the taxes because she had lost her fortune. It was the Depression, and so the house stayed vacant for many years out there on the point, what's now Smith's Cliffs. And I heard that by the 1940s, that people were upset that it was this big old abandoned house and the war and, you know, having a clear vision of everything, that the fire department burned it down in practice. Is that true?
The information I got that she lost it, she had a $50,000 loan on it for some property, and she lost it, she couldn't pay the debt.
Yeah.
But yeah, vandals kept breaking into the house and set fire to it, and so the fire department was volunteer. Used to always come out and have to put out the fire. And then what happened, finally, one time they just got tired of it and they just let it burn down.
Okay.
So there wasn't
That
time.
makes sense.
And this information came from Katie Weld, who recently died a few months ago at 94,
Okay.
who knew Pancho Barnes and was a friend of hers.
Thank you.
And her husband, John Weld.
Thank you for telling me. Okay, good. That makes perfect sense. By the way, there's an effort to make a documentary about Pancho Barnes, and in association with KOCE, or local PBS station. And the filmmakers are Nick Spark and Amanda Pope. And if you get onto panchobarnesfilm.com, they have a 4-minute clip there, and they're still trying to raise money to make this documentary, to really tell the story about this American character. And anyway, so there's a little pitch there to maybe help them get that film completed. It's tax deductible. They have a $75,000 matching grant from an industrialist, but they haven't, that expires July 1, by the way, so there's some urgency.
So whom do they contact if they're interested in donating to this?
Actually, the donation is to KOCE, Pancho Barnes Fund, and it's a 501(c), so it's a foundation, and it's tax deductible. It'd be great to see that happen, and we've provided complete access to all the archive for that.
Could we get the family to formally introduce themselves that are here?
Please, please.
Well, we want to know who you are.
Okay, my name's Stephanie Reed, and I'm married to Steve Reed, who is Joyce's nephew. So a member of Pancho's family is inadvertently, I guess, come back to we live at the top of the world.
I'm Joyce Barnes Robinson, and I live in Newport Beach, and it's been a joy having this person. Even though she's gone, she's still very much in our household and in our memories, and there are a million funny stories. And I wish we had 3 days here. We'd have a ball.
Well,
Wait, one more.
little bit more about what other things you're doing and have done?
Okay, well, actually, I'm a neuropsychologist, and in private practice in Pasadena and Santa Monica, and also because I am the current caretaker of this archive of Pancho Barnes, trying to get it cataloged and put together for eventual donation to a university or museum. I mean, unfortunately, when I stumbled onto this archive, it was in the process of almost being dismantled and sold. Was actually logged, some of it was tagged for sale at Sotheby's Aviation Auction, some of it was going to go off to some other local auction houses, and then garage sales in Lancaster and Palmdale. And things, very important letters from very famous pilots like Ira Reid and Frank Clark and Paul Mance, things like that, probably would have been sold just for the stamp on the envelope and the contents. People were clueless who these people were. And Pancho never threw anything out, so it's a very extensive archive. And she always had some money, and so what's great is she had a secretary, so both sides of the correspondence are usually there, her letter going out plus the reply. Unfortunately, it's not cataloged and in no particular order. So it's a tremendous job to put this thing together. And so that's what I've also been doing, is trying to get this all put together. Yes, Maxine?
If you ought to tell how Chuck Yeager saved her boxes.
Yes.
From the fire.
Well, this is a very interesting story. What happened was Pancho had a huge operation going out there in Muroc. This Happy Bottom Riding Club was huge, and everybody who was anybody went there from in aviation. She was very well respected because she was one of them. And but now in the late 40s, we're entering into the Cold War time, and then the McCarthy era happening, and she had a very large contingent of friends who were from Hollywood. And of course, back then, you know, if you're from Hollywood, you're communist and suspect, perhaps. And rather than, and her friends had left the base. The commander and a new commander was brought in to get her to move, because her operations were right next to what was supposed to be a top secret installation during the Cold War period. And rather than just saying, Pancho, why don't you move, times have changed, which she probably would have done if they paid her a good price, a fair price for her land. No, probably because she was a woman, they decided, well, what can we do? She's got beautiful women here of hosts. Let's accuse her of being a madam running a whorehouse, which is what they did. Now, the reason they did that is because the minute there's a morals charge, it immediately puts your business off limit to the military. And they tried to destroy her business. And what happened then is she was a very patriotic lady, and she said, you know, it's my patriotic duty to roust out the scoundrels in government who perpetrate such an injustice. So she sued the person who accused her of being a madam for slander, and sued the Air Force to roust out what was going on, and was so brilliant and smart that she served as her own attorney. And guess what? She won. But although she won the war, she lost the battle. She won the battle, she lost the war, because what happened is, before the verdict came in, her place burned to the ground under mysterious circumstances. Now, there had been other fires on the ranch in prior years, them trying to smoke her out, basically. And what happened was Chuck Yeager was there when that fire happened, along with some other friends, and they saved a lot of her archive because he was a close friend with her. And it was hidden because they thought, gosh, if they're willing to do that, they're going to come back and get the rest of it. And so it was a well-known secret among her friends that her archive had survived, although she lost all her trophies, her flying trophies, and a lot of other personal goods, but a good chunk of it did survive. And back in those days, there was no insurance for those kinds of things. So it wasn't about that, it was really about saving history. And you have to remember, Pancho Barnes knew about history, and she knew she was at the nexus of so much going on. Anyway, she was a low, and so she knew how important it is to keep the history together. And so, despite even having lost all her money, later on, she did everything she could to keep the archive together. And even in her passing, when her fourth and last husband inherited the archive, Mac McHenry, he didn't have much money, but he also tried to keep it together. So it was a sad situation when I stumbled onto it and it was about to be scattered to the four corners of the wind. I'm just glad that opportunity happened. And too often times women's history is lost. And this is a very significant woman in American history.
There's a question in the back of the room, please.
I wonder, how was it that you stumbled upon this?
I'm so glad you asked that question. This is actually an interesting story. For many years, since I was 17, I've collected the photography of George Hurell. So we're talking about towards the end of the 1960s, I started collecting the photography of George Hurell. Why I did that is because I wanted to learn how to photograph like that, make photographs like that. And I grew up in a community where the guy who owned the camera store often referred to himself as the poor man's Hurell because he was an amateur photographer. And of course that begged the question, well, who's George Hurell? And it was because of that connection that I found out about George Hurell when I was still in my teens. And when I was in high school, I was studying photography, and I told my teacher that I wanted to shoot like George Hurell. Well, she knew who George Hurell was. And she says, well, the best thing to do is to start going to some of the movie memorabilia stores and buy a photograph you like and bring it back, and I'll show you how he placed the lights. So as a result of doing that, really learning how to shoot like this, and by the way, I was a photographer, and that's one of the ways I put myself through college, was being a photographer as well as a warehouse foreman and a few other jobs. Anyway, learning how to shoot that way, I ended up with a very large collection of his work over time, because once I learned how to sort of place the lights, I just realized how beautiful these photographs were. And I used to drive the people in the stores crazy in Hollywood because I didn't know who the movie stars were. I was too busy body surfing. And you know, back in the 60s, you couldn't watch these films on television because they weren't running films like that. And there was no silent films houses, or, you know, and there was no video. So basically, the celebrity of the person didn't get in the way, so I was really able to see the photography and the composition. It wasn't, oh, what a great picture of Jean Harlow or Dorothy Jordan. It was, wow, look at that. Look at how he achieved that effect. So I continued to collect the work because I just thought it was beautiful. And now, flash forward to 1979, and I'm working downtown in Hollywood as a warehouse foreman at a tile factory and loading tiles that were coming up from Mexico. And my other job was working for UCLA as a photographer for the Graduate School of Education. So after I finished my shift, I'd go over to Producer's Lab on Santa Monica Boulevard to drop off my film to get it developed and proofed and some pictures made so I could turn it into the editor. And one day I'm in there and I'm looking up on the wall, and there's these large blow-ups of Katharine Hepburn, Marlene Dietrich, Greta Garbo, and I said to John at the desk at Producer's Lab, I said, gee, those are George Hurell photographs. He goes, yeah, you're right. He says, you just missed Mr. Hurell. He was in here a few minutes ago. I said, he's still alive? You know, it never occurred to me that he'd be alive, you know? And I said, oh my gosh, I said, can I please leave him a note? Because he has greatly influenced me, helped me appreciate detail, and actually is helping put me through college. So I left him a note, and I didn't hear from him for 2 weeks, and I thought, oh, he blew me off, you know, he's a famous guy, and never hear from him. And then I got home one day from school, and there's a message on my little phone machine. It said, hi, this is George Hurell. I'm sorry I didn't get back to you earlier, but he had been fishing in Mexico with his son Michael. Something that he did whenever he could get away, and he said he would love to meet me. And so he'd read my note and he liked it. And a couple of weeks later, he says, you know, would you mind bringing with you some of the old photography? Because, you know, I was a worker for hire and I never kept this stuff. You know, you just did the work. It wasn't, hey, George, did you shoot another masterpiece today? It was, George, how many pounds of negatives did you shoot today? Oh, and you've got some time, would you go up and shoot Dorothy Jordan? You know, get a few more pictures of her ready. They worked them. So I showed up with about 119 vintage prints, large format, 10 by 13, 11 by 14. And he looked at them and he was, oh my gosh, these are wonderful. And of course then I had to tell him how I found them, and over the years I've been collecting. And he was starting to tell me the stories behind the photographs, which were really great. And anyway, he says, do you mind if I borrow these, you know, just to make some copy makes? And I figured, well, sure, you know, George Hurell, I'm here, we're both using the same lab by coincidence. So I let him borrow, gave him to John, and got them, and we decided we'd get together the following week. And I come back, and there's George, of course, always on time. By the way, every time I saw him, he always was George Hurell, always dressed just like you would expect a high glamour photographer with a tweed jacket with a little cravat or something. And always on time, always even a little ahead of time. And anyway, he starts, he says, Lou, he says, I hope you don't mind, but you know, I've never had anybody just give me something without asking for something in return. He says, so, and I know you told me you wanted to be a professor, and I know you're probably not going to make any money doing that. He says, so I went ahead and signed them all. Is that okay? So, yeah, so we did that. And so then he was fascinated by some of the work that I did, and he was also happy that I wasn't really interested in what he had done in the past, but more what he was doing now. And so we'd get together for lunch about 4 or 5 times a year whenever he was in town and was available. And sometimes he would just call me up and say, hey, would you like to get together for lunch? Yeah, sure. And there were 4 places that we always went. We went to the Cheerio in Santa Monica, which is no longer there. It's now the site of Shutters. We'd go to Alice's Restaurant on Westwood Boulevard, which is near the school I was going to, UCLA at the time. Or we'd meet at Musso and Frank's downtown. Now, one thing, after I'd been there to one of these 3 places he liked to go, I discovered something they all had in common. Red booths and great lighting. So that everyone looked terrific when you sat in those booths. He was still aware of the lighting and the environment that he was in. But we continued doing that, meeting regularly over the years, and I actually was in the documentary I talked to you about in 1992, The Legends in Light, that was on TBS. They still run it every once in a while. I was interviewed as the collector. I'm the only collector interviewed, because at the time I did have one of the biggest collections of his work from the early work, because I've always collected with the idea of telling the full story, of the career of George Hurell, because I know him to be, and now he's recognized as one of the greatest photographers of the 20th century and great innovators. And you know, he's got to start right here in Laguna Beach. Yeah.
I recall we had a shop right there on Hollywood Boulevard. Inside of the street is Grauman's, and this regular storefront. I remember seeing his pictures on both sides.
Oh, you know what that was? Yes, in later years. Oh, okay. Well, I don't know about that one. Okay.
We have a studio on Sunset, like 48, 49.
Yes.
I think we did a picture.
Really?
I was in college. Whenever we heard this, right, he was a photographer, but also he wanted to look like us.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. It's a development called Sunset Plaza. It's still there at Rising Glen at Sunset Boulevard there. And actually, when he left, another photographer moved down in there by the name of Paul Hesse, who was also another very famous photographer. And I understand we're going to have a talk on Mortensen. And Hurell was greatly influenced by Mortensen, as well as were other photographers of the day, because Mortensen wrote books on photography, and they all were looking at what everybody else was doing. Oh, you asked me how I found the Pancho photo. I didn't finish the story. So, so here I've met George Hurell, I've got this collection, and now, about 4 years ago, you always plan museum shows about 2 to 3 years in advance, and I'd been asked to co-curate a show, retrospective, to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the birth of George Hurell out at Palm Springs Desert Museum. And in all my years of collecting, I had never seen one photograph of Pancho Barnes taken by George Hurell. And Pancho Barnes, you have to start the story there, because she was the person who encouraged him to get into photography in the first place and to make a career in Hollywood photography, which is what he's known for, glamour photography. So, even though I'd been in this documentary, you know, even that producer had never seen a photograph, produced that documentary without having a photograph of Pancho Barnes in it, taken by George Hurell. So anyway, I did some searching around and eventually stumbled onto the estate of Mac McKendry, who was her fourth and last husband, who inherited her estate when she passed away in 1975. And in that estate were some photographs of Pancho Barnes taken by George Hurell. And that's how I was first exposed to the estate of Pancho Barnes. And there weren't that many photographs by Hurell in the estate, actually. There was probably only 10 unique photographs by George Hurell in the estate. And so I bought those for the show. And then the executors of the estate, Dana Kilinowski, who herself is an aviation historian and on the board of the Flight Test Historical Foundation, she was a good person to be the head up the estate, told me her sad tale of woe about the task that she had ahead of her, that you know, it was supposed to be sold as an intact archive because, you know, it survived all this time. But under the will, if it wasn't sold within a few years, then it had to be broken up. And she had reached that point now where she was going to have to start selling things individually. And so I decided, wow, this is terrible. And so I had some friends who were pilots, and I put out the word. I wasn't interested in buying this thing. What am I going to do with an archive? I'm a professor, right? So I spent several months trying to find people who might be interested in buying this archive, but nobody wanted it because it was uncatalogued. It was 93 Union ice boxes of just stuff dumped in, you know, since the time of the fire, and it had just been in storage. So anyway, it came down to the very end when it was going to go out, and anyway, that's when I ended up purchasing it, really, to save it. Anyway, that's how I got the Pancho Barnes photo. All right.
Hear you speak again.
Thank you.
We got right. Join me in thanking Dr. Lou Dalia. What a great show. Thank you. If you haven't given us your address and your email address, we would appreciate it. We've got our work cut out for us because actually next year is the 80th anniversary of the city of Laguna Beach. And you know, time comes and goes, but we really ought to do something for our 80th anniversary. May is Heritage Month in Laguna Beach. This is part of the events. Upcoming is the Village Laguna Charm House Tour, which is on Sunday, May 21st. There are walks, historical walks, so get involved. As Lou reminded us, you know, September 18th is the William Mortensen program sponsored by the Laguna Beach Historical Society. And check out the www.lagunaworldnews.com, and it's being telecast there right now. We thank you all for your support. Hope everybody becomes members. And who's on the cleanup committee? Well, I guess I'm the only one. Okay, thank you, everybody. Oh, wait a second. Let me turn it over to Lou one more time.
One more thing. If you want to know more about Pancho Barnes and George Hurell, we've established a great little website, panchobarnes.com, P-A-N-C-H-O, barnes.com, and then hope to see you at the Queen Mary exhibit starting on July 1. And there'll be a ton of photographs up there.
So the Hurell starts July 1st.
July 1.
Very good. Okay.